experiment 6, the relative strengths of some acids. So step number 1, obtain 4 test tubes. Use a graduated cylinder to place 1 ml of distilled water in each test tube. Mark the height of the meniscus in each test tube with a Sharpie. Pour out the water and dry the test tubes. So I already went ahead and done that. As you can see, I've got 1 ml markings on the test tubes, and I also numbered the test tubes 1 through 4. So we're going to obtain 1 ml of the solution to be tested in each test tube. I figured so it's easier for you guys to keep track. We're going to go in the same order as they are in the lab manual. So we're going to start with hydrochloric acid, HCl. And we're going to put 1 ml of HCl in each test tube. And then we're going to test the hydrochloric acid with the wide range pH paper that we have here. And here is a little graph showing what the pH is at based on the results. So we're just going to take a little piece of this and then we're going to take 3 drops of that, place it on the pH paper, and then we'll be able to tell what the pH is. So as you can see, it's very like candy red looking. So probably about a 2 based on this scale. Now we're going to go ahead and add 3 drops of different indicator solutions to each of the 4 test tubes. Again, I'm going to do this in order based on the graph. So I'm going to start with methyl orange into test tube number 1. That's 3 drops. As you can tell, it's kind of like a hot pink color. For test tube number 2, I'm going to use methyl red. This one's also giving me a hot pink color. For test tube number 3, I'm going to use thiamyl blue. Same results. And finally, for test tube number 4, I'm going to use bromothiamyl blue. This one's a dark yellow color. And you should be able to estimate the pH of these using the graph. So just to show you guys again, test tubes 1 to 4 and the results. Now I'm going to go ahead and rinse these out, and we're going to continue the experiment with the next solution that we want to test. So I'm now going to use H3PO4. I'm going to add 1 ml into each test tube. And then I'm going to test that on the pH paper. Also a nice dark red color. Then I'm going to go ahead and add the methyl orange to test tube number 1. Nice and pink. Methyl red to test tube number 2. Thymol blue to test tube number 3. Thymol blue to test tube number 4. Here are the final results from test tube number 1 to 4. As you can tell, test tube number 3 is actually a little bit redder than test tube number 2, where test tube number 2 is a little more pink. And test tube number 1 has a little bit of orange tint in it. Again, I'm going to go ahead and rinse these out. Now we're going to test HC2H3O2. We've got it here, so we're going to add 1 ml of this to each test tube. Then we're going to test this with a pH paper. So this one's not quite as red. Probably looking at number 3, so pH of 3. now we're going to go ahead and add methyl orange to test tube number 1. Methyl red to test tube number 2. Thymol blue to test tube number 3. And bromothymol blue to test tube number 4. And here are the results going from 1 to 4. And now I'm going to rinse these out. So now we're going to go ahead and add NaH2PO4 to each test tube, 1 milliliter. And we're going to test it on the pH paper. That's about a 4, a pH of 4. Next, we're going to add the methyl orange to the first test tube. Methyl red to the second test tube. Thymol blue to the third test tube. And bromothymol blue to the fourth test tube. And here are the results for the solution. I'm going to rinse these out, and we're going to restart with another solution. Now we're going to use aluminum nitrate. We're going to add 1 ml into each test tube. Then we're going to go ahead and add methyl orange to the first test tube. Methyl red to the second test tube. Thymol blue to the third test tube. And bromothymol blue to the fourth test tube. And here are the results for this solution. Now I'm going to go ahead and add zinc nitrate into each test tube, 1 milliliter. And I'm going to test it on the pH paper. This gives us about a pH of 5. I don't remember giving you guys the pH for aluminum, so I'm just going to do that real quick in case I did forget. So here's the pH for aluminum nitrate. And that gives you about between a 3 and a 4 on the pH scale. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and add the methyl orange to the first test tube. Methyl red to the second test tube. Vinyl blue to the third test tube. And bromothymol blue to the fourth test tube. And here are the results from test tube number 1 to 4. So now we're going to go ahead and add the NH4NO3 to each test tube, 1 milliliter. Here it is. Then we're going to also test this on the pH paper. And that comes out to being probably about a 5, pH of 5 on the pH meter here. So now we're going to add methyl orange to the first test tube. methyl red to the second test tube. Thymol blue to the fourth test tube. And bromothymol blue to the fourth test tube, sorry. So here are the results. Now we're going to repeat these steps using vinegar. And we're going to test the vinegar on the pH paper. And that gives us about a pH of, I'd say, between 2 and 3 on this scale. So we're going to go ahead and add the methyl orange to test tube number 1, methyl red to test tube number 2, thymol blue to test tube number 3, and bromothymol blue to test tube number 4. And here are the results for vinegar. Now we're going to go ahead and add the carbonated water to each test tube, 1 milliliter. Then we're going to test it on the pH paper. And that comes out at about probably about a 6. Maybe a 5. So now we're going to go ahead and add the methyl orange to the first test tube. Methyl red to the second test tube. Thymol blue to the third test tube. And bromothymol blue to the fourth test tube. And here are the results for carbonated water. Now we're going to go ahead and test tap water. I set some tap water aside. This is from the lab in the chemistry department at the Commerce location. So I'm going to add 1 ml of this to each test tube. And then we're going to test this on the pH paper. And that comes out to probably about an 8 on the pH meter. So first I'm going to add the methyl orange to test tube number 1. Then methyl red to test tube number 2. And then thymol blue to test tube number 3. And then bromothymol blue to test tube number 4. And here are the results for Commerce tap water. Now I'm going to rinse these out and we're going to do distilled water. So I'm going to add 1 ml of distilled water to each test tube. And then I'm going to check the pH of the distilled water using the pH paper. Actually, I'm just going to use the other side. And this comes out to probably about, kind of looks like it's at about a 6. Then I'm going to go ahead and add the methyl orange to the first test tube. Methyl red to the second test tube. Thymol blue to the third test tube. And bromothymol blue to the fourth test tube. And here are the results for distilled water.